Christmas night, my uncle blocked the front door and told me something I will never forget. Not quietly, not privately. He said it loud enough for the entire house to hear. "You're not one of us." 23 relatives were inside the living room, my cousins, my aunts, my grandparents. Even my mom. Everyone heard it. Nobody stopped him. My mom was standing near the couch holding a glass of wine. When she saw me standing there on the porch, she didn't argue with him. She didn't defend me. She actually laughed, not because she thought it was funny, but the kind of laugh people make when they're uncomfortable and want the moment to go away. Then she said something even worse. "Just go home," she told me. "It's not a big deal, not a big deal," after 25 years in that family. Apparently being told you're not family anymore wasn't a big deal. For a few seconds I just stood there on the porch. Christmas music was playing inside the house. I could smell cinnamon and roasted turkey drifting out the door. My cousin Jake was standing behind my uncle looking at the floor. No one moved. No one said anything. Then my uncle took half a step forward and pushed the door slightly closed. "This dinner is for family," he said. Then he added the part that finally made everything click. Real family. And suddenly every weird moment from the last 2 decades made sense. The adoption: I was adopted when I was 3 days old. My parents never hid that from me. They explained it early. They told me adoption meant I was chosen, that they wanted me inside our house. That part was mostly true, but extended family is different. Extended family can turn something simple into a permanent label. Growing up, every family gathering had the same pattern. Someone would point out how my cousin had my mom's smile, or how another cousin had my grandfather's nose. Then someone would look at me and say something like, "Well, genetics are funny, huh?" Everyone would laugh. When I was little, I laughed too. I thought that was just how families joked. But when you're the punchline every single time, the joke starts to feel different. The first time it became real when I was 16, my uncle David decided to explain things more clearly. He pulled me aside during a barbecue, just the two of us near the grill. "You're a good kid," he said. Then he paused. "But you know you're not really family, right?" He said it casually, like he was explaining basic math. I remember staring at him, trying to understand if he was serious. I had lived with these people my entire life, spent every Christmas, every birthday, every Thanksgiving with them. But according to him, none of that counted. I didn't argue. My parents raised me to be polite, so I nodded and walked away. But that sentence stayed in my head for years, because once someone says something like that, you start noticing every moment that proves they meant it. The invisible wall. After that day, every family gathering felt slightly different, not openly hostile, just distant, like there was an invisible wall between me and everyone else. I tried harder to fit in. I helped cook during holidays, learned old family recipes, memorized stories about relatives I had never met. I thought if I participated enough, eventually I'd stop feeling like an outsider. It never worked, and every year, my Uncle David was the one who reminded me, not always directly, sometimes just small comments, "You wouldn't understand," he'd say during family stories, "before your time." But the message underneath was always the same: you weren't really there. You don't really belong. The Christmas that changed everything this Christmas was supposed to be different. My parents were getting older, and recently they had started pushing back on some of the extended family's behavior. They said things had gone too far. So they asked me to come to Christmas dinner like we used to when I was younger. I agreed. The dinner was being hosted at my Uncle David's house. Same place as every year. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the house looked exactly like it always did. Lights everywhere. Music playing inside, cars lining the street. For a moment I actually felt hopeful. Maybe things were finally changing. I walked up to the door and knocked. My cousin Jake opened it. The moment he saw me, his face changed. "Oh," he said quietly. "Hey." Then my uncle appeared behind him. His expression hardened immediately. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I frowned. "It's Christmas. The family is gathering." Instead of moving aside, he stepped forward and blocked the doorway. "You weren't invited," he said. I looked past him into the living room. My mom was standing there. "Watching, Mom?" I said. She avoided my eyes. That's when my uncle said the line that ended everything. "This dinner is for family," he said. "Real family." And that's when I realized something. For 25 years, I had been trying to prove I belonged, but they had already decided. The moment I walked away, I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just turned around and walked back down the driveway. My hands were shaking by the time I got into my car. For a minute I just sat there breathing. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. Because 8 months earlier, I had done something I never told anyone in that house. I submitted my DNA to an ancestry site. At the time, I thought it was just curiosity. I wanted to know where I came from, who my biological family was. I never expected the result that came back. 2 weeks after submitting the test, I received a notification. The site had found a close match, a half-sister. Her name was Rebecca, and the conversation that followed between us was the reason Christmas dinner was about to collapse. I opened the family group chat. 23 relatives were inside it. I attached a screenshot, then I typed one sentence: if I'm not family. Someone should probably explain why this DNA test says Uncle David shares 50% of my DNA. Then I pressed send. 5 minutes later, half the house stood up and walked out. And my uncle realized the worst possible thing. The kid he spent 20 years telling you're not family might actually be the only person in that house who biologically was. The message showed up in the family group chat about 30 seconds after I sent it. For a moment, nothing happened. Inside the house, I could still hear Christmas music playing. Someone laughed. Glasses clinked. Nobody had seen it yet. Then the first read receipt appeared. Uncle David, then my Aunt Karen, then 3 cousins, then my mom. And suddenly the noise inside the house stopped. It didn't fade gradually, it just stopped. You know that moment when a room full of people suddenly realizes something is wrong. That's what it sounded like through the open windows. Someone inside said, "Wait, what is this?" Another voice said, "Is this a joke?" I stayed in the car and watched the front door, because I already knew what they were seeing. A screenshot of my ancestry report. Right there in the group chat, shared DNA, 50%. Right next to the name, David Carter, my uncle. The DNA test 8 months earlier. When I sent in that DNA sample, I didn't expect anything dramatic. I thought maybe I'd discover distant cousins, maybe learn something about my biological background. But 2 weeks later, the site sent me a notification. Close family match found. The name was Rebecca Lawson. The relationship prediction said, half-sibling. At first, I thought it was an error. So I sent her a message through the site. She responded within 2 hours. "Hi," she wrote. "I think we might be related." That message turned into a phone call later that night. Rebecca was 29, she lived in Colorado. And just like me, she had taken the test out of curiosity. During that first conversation, we compared basic information: birthplaces, dates, adoption records. Everything lined up in ways that made the connection almost impossible to ignore. Our biological mother had been very young when she got pregnant with me. She placed me for adoption. Years later, she started a family of her own. Rebecca was one of those children, so technically, she was my half-sister. That part made sense. But the part that didn't make sense was my biological father, because my adoption paperwork listed him as unknown. Rebecca had access to a little more information than I did. Her mom had eventually told her the truth about my adoption, and one night, about 2 months after we first spoke, Rebecca asked me a strange question. "Do you have anyone named David in your adoptive family?" I laughed when she asked. "Yeah," I said. "My uncle." She didn't laugh. There was a long pause on the phone, then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Because that's the name my mom gave when I asked who your father might be." The possibility at first I thought it was ridiculous. My uncle. That didn't make sense. But Rebecca had already done some research. My birth mother had lived in the same town where my uncle worked during that time. Same year, same neighborhood, same hospital where I was born, and the DNA percentages. They matched a parent-child relationship perfectly. The more we looked at the evidence, the harder it became to ignore. If the records were right, if the DNA was right, then the man who spent 20 years telling me I wasn't family was probably the one person in that house who actually was related to me. Back to Christmas night inside the house, voices were getting louder now. I heard someone say, "This says 50%. Another voice asked, "What does that mean?" My cousin answered quietly, "That's parent level." Then the front door flew open. My Uncle David stepped outside holding his phone. His face looked completely different now. The confidence he had earlier when blocking the door was gone. "What is this?" he demanded. I rolled down my window. "It's a DNA result," I said. "That's impossible, maybe," I replied calmly, "but the website seems pretty confident." Behind him, several relatives had gathered on the porch. Every single one of them was staring at their phones. My Aunt Karen spoke next. "David," she said slowly, Why does this say you share 50% DNA? My uncle turned toward her immediately. Because it's fake, he snapped, but the problem with DNA tests is they come with explanations. And someone inside the house was already reading them. My cousin Jake walked out onto the porch. The site explains the percentages, he said. 50% means parent or child. The porch went completely silent. I watched my uncle's jaw tighten, then he looked back at me. You're trying to embarrass me, he said. I shrugged. I didn't write the DNA. The shift what happened next was something I didn't expect. For years my uncle had controlled the narrative. He decided who belonged, who didn't. Everyone just went along with it. But now, people were starting to question him. One of my cousins said quietly, if that's even remotely possible. Another voice from inside added, then she actually is family. Someone else finished the thought, more than the rest of us. That sentence hit the room like a dropped plate. Because suddenly the years of comments and jokes looked very different. If the DNA was correct, then the person who had treated me like an outsider had actually been excluding his own child. My uncle's voice rose. This is ridiculous, he said. You're all overreacting. But the room inside the house was no longer celebrating Christmas. Now they were arguing, and the conversation was moving without him. The first people leave about a minute later. My Aunt Karen stood up. She walked toward the door and grabbed her coat. If this test is accurate, she said, then we need to talk about a lot of things. Another relative stood up behind her, then another. The living room that had been packed with people 10 minutes earlier was suddenly shifting. My cousin came halfway down the driveway toward my car. They're freaking out in there, he said quietly. Why? I asked. He shrugged, because if this is real. David just spent 20 years telling his own daughter she didn't belong. Behind him, the front door opened again. 2 more relatives walked out. One of them looked straight at my uncle and said, you might want to explain this. No one laughed, no one defended him. The Christmas party was officially over, and the worst part for my uncle, this was only the beginning, because what nobody inside that house knew yet was that Rebecca had found one more piece of information, something that would make the entire situation even worse for him. At this point, Christmas dinner was already over. Half the relatives had coats on. People were standing in the driveway. No one was talking about gifts anymore. Everyone was staring at my uncle. And for the first time in my life, he didn't have control of the room. But the worst part for him hadn't even happened yet, because the DNA test was only the beginning. The second message while everyone was arguing inside the house, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. She had been quietly watching the family group chat. Her message was simple. Did you show them the other file yet? I stared at the screen for a second. Then I typed back, not yet. 3 dots appeared. Then another message came through. You probably should. Inside the house someone said loudly, David, just answer the question. Another voice added, did you know her biological mother? My uncle looked furious now. This is ridiculous. He snapped, I'm not explaining anything because there's nothing to explain. But the problem with secrets is that once they start unraveling, they rarely stop, and Rebecca had already pulled the next thread. What Rebecca found 2 months after we discovered the DNA connection, Rebecca kept researching. She requested hospital records, old city records, anything connected to the time when I was born. Eventually, she found something buried in a local archive, a complaint filed 26 years ago. The name listed in the report was my biological mother. The second name listed was my uncle David. Apparently, they had known each other, and apparently their relationship had ended badly. The report described a dispute between them. It wasn't a criminal case, nothing ever went to court, but the timing matched perfectly. 9 months before I was born, when Rebecca sent me the document, she wrote one sentence underneath it. I think he knew, and if he knew, that meant something horrifying, because that meant my uncle had spent decades watching me grow up, watching family gatherings, watching holidays, watching birthdays, and every single time, he chose to treat me like I didn't belong. Back in the driveway inside the house, the argument had grown louder. I heard someone say, "You're avoiding the question." Another voice asked, "Did you know her mother?" My uncle didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward my car again. "This stops now," he said. "You're spreading lies." I looked at him through the open window. Then I said the one sentence that made the room go silent again. "Do you want me to send the report too?" His expression changed instantly. Not anger, something else, fear, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I opened the group chat again. Then I attached the second file Rebecca had found, the archive document, the one with his name on it. Then I pressed send. The silence, it took about 10 seconds for people to open it. 10 seconds of complete silence. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God," another voice said. "This says they knew each other." Someone else said, "David." But my uncle didn't respond, because suddenly the entire situation looked very different. This wasn't just a random DNA result anymore. Now there was history. Now there was evidence. Now there were questions he couldn't avoid. My Aunt Karen spoke again. Her voice was quieter this time. "Did you know she was pregnant?" "No," answered David. She said, "Did you know?" He looked around at everyone standing there. Then he said the worst possible thing. "I didn't think it was mine." The reaction was immediate, not yelling, not chaos, just disbelief, because suddenly everyone realized something. Even if he thought it wasn't his, he had still known there was a possibility, and for 25 years, he chose to treat me like an outsider anyway. The moment everything changed, that's when my grandfather stood up. He had been sitting quietly near the window the entire time, watching everything. He walked slowly toward the door. Then he looked directly at my uncle. "Let me understand this," he said. "You thought there was a chance." My uncle didn't respond, and instead of figuring it out, my grandfather continued, "You spent 20 years telling her she wasn't family." No one moved. No one defended him. My grandfather turned toward the rest of the room. "Christmas dinner is over," he said. Then he walked outside, past my uncle, past everyone else, and stopped beside my car. He leaned down to the window. For a moment he didn't say anything. Then he said something that surprised me. "I'm sorry." That was it. 2 words. But they meant more than anything anyone had said that night. The family splits after that. The house emptied quickly. People grabbed coats. Cars started leaving. Nobody wanted to stay in the middle of the situation anymore. Within 15 minutes, the driveway looked completely different. Half the family had gone home. My uncle was still standing near the porch alone, and for the first time since I'd known him, no one was standing beside him. My cousin walked down the driveway again. "This is insane," he said quietly. "Yeah," I said. He looked back toward the house. Then he said something unexpected. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you told everyone." I nodded. Then I started the car. The final twist as I pulled away, my phone buzzed again. It was Rebecca. Her message said, "Well, I guess Christmas dinner got interesting." I laughed, because she wasn't wrong. But the real twist of the story wasn't the DNA. It wasn't the argument. It wasn't even the family walking out. The real twist was something much simpler. For 25 years I had believed something was wrong with me. I thought I was the outsider, the extra piece, the person who didn't quite belong, but that night proved something different. Sometimes the people who spend years telling you that you don't belong are just trying to hide the truth about where you actually do. And sometimes the fastest way to reveal the truth is to stop trying to prove yourself and just press send.